Next guest is focused on entitlement reform. Joining us now from Washington, Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee. Should note that he voted yes to the recent so-called fiscal cliff bill, but he is calling for entitlement reform in this next round of negotiations. And why don't we put some details on the board, Senator? What exactly would you like to do with entitlement reform? And if you can, be specific.
I will be very specific, and let me tell you why I want to do that. And put it on human terms, we've got millions of Americans who are waiting, counting the days literally, until they're eligible for Medicare to pay their medical bills. And the trustees say Medicare won't have the money to do that in just 11 years. So we need to take $1 trillion of the growth in Medicare spending and reduce that. And Senator Corker and I have suggested that first you restructure Medicare. This would save about $700 billion.
When you say restructure Medicare, what do you mean?
Well, I mean by that, I was about to tell you, restructure Medicare so that it can compete with a reformed Medicare Advantage. That would leave seniors the opportunity to continue to choose Medicare. You should increase the Medicare age by a couple of years. Warren Buffett and I could stand that, and people with lower incomes will be eligible for Obamacare. We can increase premiums for those with higher incomes. On Medicaid, we can give states a waiver that would save about $50 billion. And on Social Security, we can also make sure that over the next 50 years it's solvent by using a consumer price index that's more realistic. All those steps would save about $937 billion, which we suggest Congress do at the same time we increase the debt ceiling about $1 trillion, which is what the president has asked.
How would the means testing program work? Meaning what would be the different marginal rates?
Well, it would depend. I mean, it could be any. It would just mean that someone with higher incomes would pay a higher Medicare premium than someone with lower incomes. It would mean that someone with higher incomes would have less of a Medicare benefit than someone with lower incomes. It could be set at any level. Now, what we've done, Senator Corker and I, and what Alice Rivlin and Senator Domenici did, and what Paul Ryan and Senator Wyden did, is put out a specific plan for this to deal with the Medicare fiscal cliff. This is what the president needs to do for the next 2 months. This will not happen without presidential leadership, and he needs to be as good going across the country persuading us that we don't want to push seniors off the Medicare fiscal cliff as he has, that we want to raise taxes on the rich.
Do you have any hope over the next 2 months that you will actually get there on this issue?
Sure, I do. I mean, the president's beginning his second term. He knows exactly what needs to be done. I mean, we've got 40% of the budget restrained to a growth of about the rate of inflation. That's what we call discretionary spending. The mandatory spending, which is going up at the rate of 3 to 4 times inflation, is led by Medicare. So the president's very skillful. He knows what to do. He's been told by his debt commission. He has several options. He has a lot of us in the Senate in a bipartisan way who are willing to work with him on this. This is his job to do. Great crises aren't solved except by presidential leadership, and we need to see more of that on this plan.
How much of this is all going to get wrapped up in the debt ceiling debate, which he has said that he won't negotiate on, and is clearly trying to separate these issues?
Well, I think instead of saying what we won't do for the next 2 months, let's have a president and those of us on Capitol Hill say what we will do. And what we ought to do is work together to do what everybody knows needs to be done. This is what nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about. The president has not made a proposal on it. He keeps talking about a number, but he's never done what Senator Corker and I have done, which is say, here's exactly what we need to do. He needs to provide that leadership. If he does, it'll happen.
Senator, this is Arthur Brooks. I got a quick question for you about what I think is probably the easiest, most common sense of the reforms that you just talked about, which is matching the retirement age for Medicare up with the retirement age for Social Security, which is moving it from 65 to 67. And I know that you're in favor of that, and so is virtually everybody who's looking at this. But the president has seemed kind of hostile to that and has basically said that any kind of reform, even the simplest reforms, are going to have a tax side quid pro quo. In other words, the rich are going to have to pay even more. How much are the Republicans in the Senate going to be favorable to the idea of having even more tax increases in the top echelons in exchange for some of these common sense reforms that you're talking about?
Well, we're not interested in new taxes. I mean, the president won the election. He got his tax increase on rich people. I mean, you could increase taxes on the wealthy and cut their heads off and not make a dent in the problem we have with spending and entitlements. So what we're willing to do is for those who are wealthier to have less benefits and pay more for the benefits they receive. But I'm not, and I have yet to meet a Republican after this last week who's willing to raise taxes more. But again, let's focus. And Arthur, you're pretty good on pointing this out. The victims here are not some number somewhere. These are millions of Americans who are going to be pushed right off the Medicare fiscal cliff in 11 years, which is when the Medicare trustees say that program won't have enough money to pay all its bills. We are not doing our job if we don't help those seniors now.
Hey, Senator, you know that what I hear as opposition to anything like this is that once you make Medicare seem like something that benefits lower income people rather than across the board, then that's when the liberals start to worry that you're trying to somehow take away that social contract. So they don't want to do anything that, or even Social Security. I've seen really wealthy people in here say that they paid into it, they want to get it out. The minute you make it where it seems like welfare, then it stays or numbered. I mean, why do you think the president is going to bargain with you on what his liberal base definitely doesn't want to do?
Well, the president's job is to lead the country. I mean, he's not a senator anymore. His job is to go across and say, I mean, this isn't as easy as persuading you to raise taxes on your neighbor with a bigger house. Yeah. This is tough work. And the president has to lead it. As far as social contract, the contract is that the program will be there to pay your medical bills and to help you afford older age when you get to that age. All through its history, you've always gotten more back from Social Security and more back from Medicare than you've paid in. The problem is we're borrowing 42 cents out of every dollar here, and the government's going to go broke. And it's going to be led by the Medicare Trust Fund, which its trustees have said will go broke in 11 years. So this is not about some abstract notion. This is about whether you're going to be able to have money to pay your medical bill in 11 years when you get to be 65 or 66 years old.
So the whole debt ceiling debate should be about Medicare reform. That's what you think Republicans should focus on?
It should be about entitlements, and here's why. We already have taken the 40% of the budget that we call discretionary spending, and that's national defense and to national parks, and it's going up at the rate of inflation. The other part, led by Medicare, is going up at 3 or 4 times the rate of inflation. That's the problem, and that's the problem that presidential leadership has to focus on, and if he does, we're ready to help him do that.
Senator, we spoke, we were actually in Washington in the weeks leading up to the fiscal cliff. We spoke with several senators who told us that if you wanted to look at the fiscal cliff talks as any sort of a success, you would have to see a grand bargain, something that was $4 trillion that we went after the deficit is. We didn't get that sort of a grand bargain. A lot of people say that is not anywhere near what we're going to get. How should we be measuring success in this next round of talks?
I would measure success not by looking at whether the Congress has the courage and the president shows the leadership to look at the problem that everyone knows has to be dealt with but don't want to talk about, and that's entitlement led by Medicare. I would not look at the first 10 years because it's harder in the first 10 years of reform to get the kind of savings you want. I'd look at the second, third, and fourth 10 years to make sure structurally the program is sound enough to help older Americans afford their medical bills. That would be the test. And if you do that, that adds up to about $4 trillion, along with all the other things we've done with the Budget Control Act.
Okay, Senator, we're going to leave it there. We thank you for your perspective this morning, and we'll see how this all plays out, and hopefully get to talk to you as it does.
Thank you.
Eli Lilly